Alrighty, in our next game, I am playing black in our viewer game analysis, and I'm a viewer, so why not let me submit some of my USCF rated games. In a game in 25 tournament, and I'm playing against an 1800 rated player. And I decided to go with the Caro Kann because, again, you got to play how you feel. And for this tournament in particular, I was feeling playing solidly. I didn't feel to try to push my opponents off the board or anything like that. And what do you want to see when you're playing solidly but an exchange variation? Because why not? Like, you almost have no risk of losing with black if you know what you're doing, and it's just solid. So cool. And here, knight f3 made me feel already pretty good about my chances because this misplaces a piece. Proper way to play bishop d3 because it takes away a key square from the bishop. And after knight c6, this is a colors reversed queen's gambit declined pawn structure. After queen c7, I take away the square from the bishop. So it's very easy to mess up and go knight f3, bishop g4, and you've got a true blue colors reversed Carlsbad structure. But h3, very good move because you take away all the squares that are useful from my bishop. And now knight f6, g6, bishop f5. White has held his first move edge, and this is a very playable position. So this is how, like, one of the many routes that white could take to get a decent game. But knight f3 is going to give me not too much trouble here. Knight c6, then bishop e3, another move that is kind of passive. And we'll see pretty quickly, bishop g4, knight c3. This goes against the structure. You want to have the pawn on c3, and it's going to waste time. So e6, bishop e2, bishop d6. Strong square for the bishop, eyeing h2 as a weakness for later. And this next move is going to set the tone for the rest of the game. Because occasionally when you play certain opponents and they have white, they aren't so much playing to win, so to speak, as playing not to lose. And this move, knight e5, is starting to show that my opponent is willing to just trade everything off. So when your opponent shows willingness to start trading everything off in this manner, you got to think, okay, he's probably going to continue to do this. How can I make trades which are going to be favorable for me? And after this move, I decide to take. You go, well, you're playing against a low-rated player. Don't you want to keep the queens? Honestly, I understood that with this structure, the only chances that white has is to keep the queens and attack on the king side. Without the queens, I felt white had absolutely no counterplay, and I can go with standard development on the queen side and have a big edge. So rook c8 straight away is completely fine. I played a6 first, and we see another reactionary move. a6, a4. Well, that's not necessarily going to be good because I can now use the b4 square for my bishop. But then knight e7, flexible. Found rook c8. And this is a key moment because I actually hallucinated over the board here. And I remember just thinking, okay, this is game in 25. You just need to play reasonably here. And if I thought about king d7, I thought about rook c4, and then I thought about castles, and I'm like, okay, two of them, king d7 and castles. King d7 is kind of a commitment, and I don't really know where the game's going yet. Castles isn't much of a commitment, though I may want my king in the center. And I was having trouble deciding, and then rook c4 I just kind of looked at as at a passing glance because I knew my king needed to move one way or another in order to double rooks. But I completely missed with, after rook c4, say rook fd1. Now I go king d7, and after rook hc8, it's just a bind that white can't get out of. So the most aggressive move is typically the correct path, but castles gave my opponent time to get out of this bind with knight e2. So I go knight c6, and this is mostly because I was expecting white to go for the correct structure, and I'm going to go knight a5, and I've got flexibility. I can play for the minority attack break, the 2 versus the 4, or the 3 rather, and can also sink my knight into c4. And I was pleased that, you know, I've got room for improvement here. I can lift a rook, get the other rook over. I can choose the correct moment to attack. Notice white structure is defensive, black's aggressive, because I can choose when to do something over here. My opponent, though, after knight c6, decided straight away to go c4. And this is going to isolate a pawn, and then the rest of the game is kind of dictated by this imbalance in the pawn structure, because I see d4 as a potential weakness, and like, okay, I don't want you to double rook, so I'm going to go ahead and challenge your rook. And inevitably, another trade offered by my opponent. But the thing is you're not going to find safety in just trading. I would define this style of play by just trading unnecessarily as being a punching bag, because punching bag's not going to hit back. And playing for a draw is like a cardinal sin in my mind. And when I see my opponents doing it, this comes from years of experience playing in Alabama, where being one of the highest rated players, you get a lot of that. You can smell it in the air when you sit down with certain people that, yep, that's fear. And it's not a self-aggrandizement thing. I get those types of things in the comments from time to time. It's when you see your opponents making certain mistakes, or they have a certain mentality about the game, how can you use that against them? So pay attention to these types of mistakes. And here, I want to get my king to d5 under the best circumstances. So let's go ahead and activate h3, kind of a skittish move. King e1 is probably better, because bishop takes h2, you can go g3, and my bishop's locked in. The game 1 from the 72 World Championship comes to mind, that blunder, but I just keep on with my plan. And this is a very interesting critical moment, because my entire plan revolves around the fact that the d-pawn is isolated and is a forever weakness. So it came as a shock to me when analyzing the game that e5 is considered the best move by the engine. I'm like what I know about chess kind of gets turned on its head here, because it's like, well, why am I trading off this pawn? But after it takes, we're going to get a position similar to the main game where we can set up an infinite blockade, and the knight's going to dominate the bishop. But I just found that moment very interesting, because in the main game, I just went king c6, and then making the assessment of my bishop is, or my knight's going to be stronger than my opponent's bishop in this ending, and I wanted the key d5 square for my king. It's an important moment. So if I'm playing against a lower rated player and they play a move like bishop b4, I'm going to say to myself, I'm going to question, is this trade good for me? But in this case, my opponent didn't ask, it's like, is this trade good for me? And he played king d3 almost immediately, and allowing this trade is going to be a decisive mistake. And here, b takes c3, for instance, a takes. We see this bind structure. And the thing is, all of black's pawns are on the opposite color of the bishop, and I have room to jockey with the knight forever, probing until the opponent finally makes a mistake. So a riskless way to just torture, and especially in fast time controls, I do not objectively feel that this position is holdable for white. So coming back after taking, king takes c3 was played. So now again, it's important to take away key squares and limit counterplay. So we'll go king d5. And after b4, knight c6, hitting the d pawn. And I take time to fix the pawn structure. Notice how forever I am keeping the king out, the opposing king, and his pawns are stuck on the same color as the bishop. So already my opponent is starting to get in a bit of time trouble. I thought that f3 was probably the way to put up the most practical resistance, but I was calculating lines like this, which are inevitable. I'm going to go knight e7, threatening knight f5. So g4, all right, we'll just go back, get all of my pawns on the opposite color of the bishop, and no matter what, white can't really move the king, and he can jockey the bishop, but if he pushes pawns, you're just getting it. Like, there's no way to stop this. The bleeding will continue. So after a takes, f4 was played, and this just speeds up the progress for black. And there was only one more interesting moment. I can't play knight takes d4 here, but I was so focused on the squeeze that I was like, okay, once I get here, I have a completely dominant position and I'm winning the d pawn on my terms and creating more threats for the future. And after f5, I see a way to liquidate here with knight e3. And there's a lot of ways to go about winning the position, but I think the way that I handled it is kind of instructive, because after he plays h4, he's saying, okay, my only shot to get counterplay is if the king moves, my king's going to run in. And you can calculate, but also this was a game in 25 game, and we're on move 38. You have to think from a practical standpoint, I might miss something in calculation, which some people are better calculators than I am, and they can see immediately that king takes f5. Our pawn is going to queen long before his will, and we win. But me, I'm like, well, I've got a 3-2. I'm just going to go g6. And after f6, I went h6. And my opponent actually resigned there. So I won faster by going this route than playing the more aggressive way. And it's hard to say what's more accurate. I'm always a big fan of stifling counterplay if I can. Maybe I've just studied too many Karpov games in my day. Or as I'm getting older, I feel less tactically suited in positions and calculation oriented, so I'll play these types of solid ways. But say after h6, the way that the game could go, king d2, and I'm going to need to give him space. But the difference is, after h5, I'm queening so much faster than with that previous variation, and of course would have seen this without difficulty. So there's a kind of a few mini lessons there with white. If you're going to play a very solid variation, you've got to play it accurately to get the most out of winning chances. And when you're playing against a higher rated player, they're the ones that should be nervous, because the burden of proof and the burden of beating you is on them. So don't play too solidly, because it will definitely give them more winning chances, and they don't have to really take any risk or worry. Go after them, because you have, in this case, 1800 versus 2200, you lose 1 rating point for losing. So there's absolutely no risk in going after your opponent. So just a thought. Hopefully enjoyed viewer game analysis. And if you want to send me your game, there we go right there. Love to hear from you.